Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. So, there's something that keeps popping up in our conversations, and I'm sure you've been thinking about it too.
Yeah,
It's the Waqf board here in India.
right.
And I mean, this thing is huge. It's being called the third largest landowner in the whole country.
It's pretty wild when you think about it.
It is. It really is. And they just made all these legal changes. So we've got to, dive in and try to understand what's actually going on here. What is the Waqf board?
Right.
We've been doing some research, reading up on how much land they own, trying to understand like the history of this thing. And there are some pretty serious questions about, are they misusing this land? And then this whole new Waqf Act they're calling Umeed. What does that even mean?
Umeed. Yeah, it means hope. So I guess we'll see if it lives up to that.
Right. Yeah, that's what we're here to unpack. So let's cut through all the noise and figure out what the Waqf board is, why everybody's arguing about it, and what this new legislation is all about. So to kick things off, what is the Waqf board? Like for someone who's never heard of this before, what's the basic idea?
Yeah, okay. So at its core, waq comes from Arabic, waqafa.
Mm-hmm.
It means to link or to tie up.
Okay.
So basically, it's when you dedicate property, land, money, whatever, for like public welfare or sometimes religious purposes. It's supposed to be charitable. This is all within Islamic law, by the way.
So like a charitable donation, but with a lasting commitment.
Exactly. It's not just a one-time thing.
Right.
It's meant to be permanent.
Okay, so where did this whole idea come from? Like way back in history?
Well, there's some really early examples. Like tradition says that Prophet Muhammad himself, he donated all the income from 600 date palm trees. In Medina, he did this to help the poor.
Wow.
So from the very beginning, you see this idea of using resources to help the community.
Right, taking care of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's another important story about Hazrat Umar. After a battle, he got this piece of land, and he went to the Prophet and said, "What should I do with it?" And the Prophet told him to dedicate it as waqf, so it could benefit people, but not just him, forever. That moment really shaped how waqf is structured, made it a formal thing.
So it wasn't just about being generous one time, it's like setting up a system.
Exactly, like a continuous stream of benefits.
Makes sense. So when you dedicate a property as waqf, that's a big deal. What happens to the original owner and their family?
Oh yeah, it's a huge decision. Because once something is waqf, ownership goes to God, essentially. It's a big legal change. The person who made the waqf, we call them the waqif, and their kids, they lose most rights to the property. It has to be used for public good. It's all laid out in the waqfnama, the deed.
Oh, so the deed specifies how it's used, like you were saying, hospitals, schools.
Exactly, those kinds of things.
Gotcha. So what about selling it or passing it down? Can they do that later?
Nope, not usually. Permanence is key to waqf. You can't just change your mind. They can't sell it, can't inherit it like a normal property.
Okay, so it's really locked in. But I've heard about cases where they rent or lease waqf land.
That's right. And that's where a lot of the controversy comes in. Like, you remember the whole thing about that land leased to the ITC hotel?
Yeah.
People were questioning, is this really for charity? Does a luxury hotel fit the original goal? So, yeah, it can get messy trying to make sure these properties are used the right way.
Right, making sure it's actually benefiting the public good like it's supposed to.
Exactly.
So, all right, let's fast forward to India today. How does a property officially become waqfa? What are the steps?
Okay, so first they got to create a waqfnama. That's the document that says, hey, I want to make this property waqf, and it lists who benefits.
Okay.
Then the Waqf board, which is a government body, they come in and survey the property, make sure it's all legit,
So there is a government body that oversees this.
Oh, yeah, big time. And if everything checks out, boom, it's registered as Waqf property in the government's records. Then they appoint a mutawali, it's basically a manager. They make sure the property is maintained and the income is used according to the waqfnama.
So there's like a whole management structure in place.
Yeah.
And when did India legally recognize Waqf boards?
So the first law about this was the Waqf Act of 1954, right after independence. But the big one was the Waqf Act of 1995 under P.V. Narasimha Rao.
Okay.
That one really aimed to give the Waqf boards more power in managing these properties. The idea was to protect those assets and make sure they were used for charity, like they're supposed to be.
Makes sense to have some kind of oversight. So how much property are we talking about in India? I mean, you said third largest landowner. That's hard to even picture.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling.
It is.
They even launched this whole digital system, the Waqf Asset Management System of India, WAMSI.
Okay.
And according to that, there are about 8 lakh immovable properties, that's land, buildings, all that stuff, and around 16,000 movable properties. We're talking cash, investments, that kind of thing. all managed by 32 Waqf boards all over the country. But here's the thing.
Yeah.
That number's probably even higher, because who knows how many properties are out there that haven't been officially registered.
So even those huge numbers are probably an underestimation.
Yeah, most likely.
So you mentioned that Waqf has been around for a long time, even before India became India. When did it first show up here?
We're talking centuries ago.
Yeah.
Think Arab traders, Arab rulers coming to India. That's when Waqf started spreading here. You know, Ibn Battuta, the traveler.
Oh, yeah.
Well, he wrote about this Waqf in Damascus back in the 1300s that was specifically for, get this, replacing broken dishes in hotels. Waiters would break stuff, and this Waqf would cover the cost. Pretty interesting, right?
Wow, I never thought about it being used for something so specific.
Right. Shows you how diverse this whole concept is. So as Arab influence grew in India, so did the use of Waqf for all sorts of things, religious and charitable.
And after independence, how did things evolve? You mentioned that 1954 Act.
Yeah, after independence, India wanted to get organized, formally manage all these Waqf properties. The 1954 Act, during Nehru's time, was a big step in that direction.
Right.
And then in 1955, they amended the act, and that led to setting up state-level Waqf boards. So you had this kind of decentralized management structure across the country.
So this is where we start getting into the controversies, right? A lot of people say the 1995 Waqf Act gave the boards way too much power. What were the specific issues?
Yeah, a few parts of that act became really contentious, like Section 3. That one gave the Waqf board power to claim any property if they thought it was theirs. But here's the kicker. The burden of proof was on the person or group disputing the claim. They had to go to the Waqf tribunal.
So the board could just make a claim and the individual had to fight it. Seems a little unfair, don't you think?
Yeah, a lot of people thought so. And Section 85 made it worse. You
Yeah.
basically said, if you couldn't prove your ownership to the tribunal's satisfaction, they could evict you. And there wasn't much you could do after that. No direct appeals to the High Court or Supreme Court. So the tribunal's word was basically final.
Wow, talk about limited options. Were there other sections that were problematic?
Definitely. Section 40 really put a lot of pressure on individuals. Once the board made a claim, you had to prove you were the rightful owner. They didn't necessarily need hard evidence to make the claim in the first place.
So they could basically accuse you and you'd have to prove your innocence. That seems backwards.
Exactly. It shifted the whole burden of proof.
And it didn't end there, did it? There were those 2013 amendments.
Right, during the UPA government. And a lot of critics said those changes made the Waqf boards even stronger. Like it was harder to challenge them.
So this was kind of building up to the situation we have now.
You could say that.
It's important to remember that not every religious property falls under this Waqf thing, right?
Oh yeah, good point. There are exceptions. For instance, the Ajmer Sharif Dargah, that big Sufi shrine, it's got its own separate law. And in a lot of states, there are separate Shia and Sunni Waqf boards because they have their own endowments.
So there's complexity even within the system itself.
Absolutely.
So back to the sheer amount of land controlled by the Waqf boards, we keep hearing 8 lakh acres. What does that actually look like?
It's huge. And think about it, we're talking about 35,631 Waqf estates with 87,293 immovable properties, and on top of that, 16,173 movable properties. That makes the Waqf board the third largest landowner in India after the army and the railways. That's power.
It's hard to even wrap your head around that. And with all these claims by the Waqf board, there have got to be a ton of legal battles happening.
You better believe it. The WAMSI portal, that online system I mentioned,
Yeah.
they list over 58,000 cases that are already done and dusted, cases about these Waqf claims. And right now, there are something like 12,700 cases still sitting with the state Waqf boards. Another 18,400 in those Waqf tribunals. And get this, 165 cases have even reached the Supreme Court and high courts.
Wow.
And some of those are about really sensitive sites, like the Ram Janmabhoomi issue, the Kashi Vishwanath Temple, the Gyan Vapi Mosque. These are not small potatoes. We're talking about deep beliefs, history, all wrapped up in these disputes.
It's not just legal battles, though, right? Some people are saying these claims could actually change the demographics of certain areas.
Yeah, that's a big concern for some people. They're saying that all these illegal claims and land grabs could change who lives where. And the numbers are striking. They're saying Waqf property has doubled since 2009. It was 4 lakh acres, 3 lakh properties back then, and now it's nearly double.
So the growth is definitely noticeable. And is this spread evenly across India, or are some states more affected than others?
Oh, it's definitely not even. Uttar Pradesh has the most, about 27% of all Waqf properties. Then you've got West Bengal and Punjab, both around 9%. Tamil Nadu is at 8%. Telangana and Gujarat are both at 5%. Then Karnataka 7%, and Kerala 6%.
So certain regions are definitely more concentrated. And it's not just about the claims themselves, right? There have been a lot of accusations of corruption within the Waqf boards.
Unfortunately, that's been a problem for a long time. We're talking about Waqf board members, people connected to land mafia, even government officials and politicians. Allegations about illegal leasing, encroachment, misuse of funds, you name it.
And that Anwar Manapati committee report in Karnataka, that really exposed some of this internal corruption, right?
Yeah, that report was explosive. They said that about 29,000 acres of Waqf land in Karnataka had been illegally handed over for commercial use. And get this, another 27,000 acres weren't even registered. And the worst part, they said politicians had grabbed around 29,000 acres for themselves out of a total of 54,000 acres in the state. It's just crazy.
Wow, so widespread mismanagement. And these allegations are still coming in, right? Not just from the past.
Yeah, last year alone, the government got 194 complaints about illegal transfers and encroachment on Waqf land. And 93 of those complaints were against Waqf officials. So clearly, there's still a lot of cleaning up to do within the system.
Definitely seems like it. So what are some of the earlier cases, the big ones that really raised red flags about misuse?
Well, back in 2006, the Minority Commission came down hard on the Assam Waqf Board. They accused them of misusing a ridiculous amount of land, like 15,800 bia. They said senior politicians and officials were involved too. And over the years, there have been so many stories about prime properties being leased out illegally, given away for businesses that had nothing to do with charity. Just blatant disregard for the purpose of Waqf.
And sometimes we even see it with our own eyes. I'm thinking of that India Today sting operation.
Oh, yeah, the one in Meerut a few years ago. They caught this caretaker red-handed. He was trying to sell 68 square yards of Waqf property for 1.3 crore rupees. He said he could make it look legit by faking documents, making it look like the property was already sold. It just showed how vulnerable these properties are to corruption.
And how easy it can be to get away with it. So these allegations of misuse have led to some pretty controversial claims by Waqf boards on properties that, traditionally belong to other people. Let's talk about some specifics. What happened in Tamil Nadu?
Yeah, the Veepur case in Tamil Nadu was a real eye-opener. These Hindu farmers, they said the Waqf board just took over 57 acres of their ancestral land overnight. Just like that.
What?
Yeah, crazy, right? And when they tried to say, hey, this is our land, they ran into a wall. The officials from the administration, the police, the revenue department, they were all back in the Waqf board. These farmers, they had documents going back to the 1900s showing they'd inherited this land, been working it for generations. It really makes you question who's protecting who here.
It's terrifying to think that your land can just be taken away like that.
Right, yeah.
There was a similar case in Delhi, right, involving ancestral land.
Yeah, this woman, Rani G., she accused the Central Sunni Waqf Board of trying to grab 28.35 acres of her family's land to build a mosque. And what's interesting is, this was after the Ayodhya verdict, when the Supreme Court had already given 5 acres for a mosque.
So it almost seemed like they were pushing the boundaries, testing the waters.
Yeah, it felt like overreach to a lot of people.
And so often it seems like these disputes are tied up with religion and history, making them even more sensitive. What about that case in Bhopal with the charitable trust?
Oh, that one's still going on. This trust, the Rajdev Yanseva Nyas, they say the Waqf board declared 37,000 square feet of their land as a graveyard in 2021.
Out of the blue.
Just like that. The trust is fighting it in court, but it just shows how the Waqf board can disrupt things, even for non-Muslim organizations.
And it's not limited to private land, right? There have been claims on public property, too, like in Jammu and Kashmir.
Yeah, back in 2022, there was this report by Times. Now, alleging that in 1985, the chief minister at the time just gifted 500 crore rupees worth of public land to the Waqf board.
500 crore.
Yeah, that's a lot of public money.
Yeah.
And it really raises questions about whether these kinds of transfers are even legal.
Definitely seems questionable. And then there was the case in Delhi about that big park, the House Deer Park.
Yeah, in 2022, a BJP MLA accused an AAP MLA of putting pressure on the Delhi Development Authority to hand over 200 hectares of that park to the Waqf board. They said they wanted to turn it into a Muslim cemetery. That got people pretty riled up. I mean, that park's like the green lung for the whole city.
Yeah, I can see why people would be upset about that. It seems like the Waqf board was trying to make moves on all kinds of valuable land. And this wasn't just happening at the state level, was it? The central government got involved too, right before the 2014 elections.
Oh yeah, just before the elections that year, the UPA government decided to transfer 123 prime properties in Delhi to the Waqf board. We're talking properties owned by the Land and Development Office and the Delhi Development Authority.
Right before the elections.
Yep, right before the Model Code of Conduct kicked in. And that raised a lot of eyebrows. People were saying it was just a political move.
Yeah, that timing is definitely suspicious. Even the Allahabad High Court got caught up in all this, right?
You wouldn't believe this one. So back in 1861, they leased out some government land for 99 years, right next to where the High Court was going to be built. They kept extending the lease, and it was supposed to expire in 2018.
Okay.
But here's the thing. The High Court had expanded, and some of that leased land became part of the High Court. Around the year 2000, they built a mosque on part of that land.
Okay.
Then in 2017, right before the lease was up, the Sunni Waqf Board said, nope, the whole property's ours. It's Waqf property.
Are you serious?
I know, right? Luckily, the Supreme Court stepped in and said, no way, and they made sure the High Court kept its land.
Wow. Talk about audacity. I mean, claiming a high court, that's a new level. And then there were those claims on some really important Hindu religious sites.
Yeah, this is where it gets really sensitive. In 2022, they reportedly tried to claim the Kashi Vishwanath Temple in Varanasi, one of the holiest Shiva temples in the country. Then the Shia Waqf Board in Uttar Pradesh said a Shiva temple in Lucknow was Waqf property.
It's almost like they were trying to provoke people.
It definitely felt that way to many. And in Gujarat, they even tried to claim Dwarka, you know, the city associated with Lord Krishna.
Dwarka.
Yeah, they said Dwarka and the nearby islands were Waqf property. But a high court judge reportedly refused to even hear the case.
Probably thought it was ridiculous.
Probably. And we can't forget about the Taj Mahal, can we?
The Taj Mahal, come on, now they're just being ridiculous.
Well, that's what a lot of people thought. The Sunni Waqf Board filed a claim saying the Taj Mahal was theirs. The Supreme Court shut that down pretty quickly. They asked for proof, like Shah Jahan's signature saying it was Waqf property, and of course, they had nothing.
Of course not. That was such a desperate move.
It really was.
And there's also the case in Lucknow with Lakshman Tila.
Right, that's another ongoing dispute. Lakshman Tila, it's believed to be the place where Lakshmana from the Ramayana lived. But the Sunni Waqf Board says it's not Lakshman Tila, it's the Tili Wali Masjid, and it's theirs.
It seems like they're just going after every piece of land they can think of.
It really does sometimes.
Yeah.
And when you start claiming places that are so important to another religion, it creates so much distrust.
It's just asking for trouble.
It is. These aren't just property disputes. They're about identity, about people's faith. It can really tear communities apart.
Absolutely. So this brings us to the new Waqf Act, the one they're calling Umeed, right?
Right. Umeedu, which means hope.
Hope. We'll see about that. So when did they introduce this new law?
It was on April 2, 2025 in the Lok Sabha, and it sounds like it was a pretty chaotic day. The opposition was protesting while the Minority Affairs Minister, Kiran Rijiju, was trying to introduce the bill.
So already a lot of tension. And what happened after they introduced it?
Well, they sent it to a joint parliamentary committee. That committee was led by a BJP MP, Jagdambika Pal. They looked at it, debated it, and then submitted their report on February 13th, 2025.
Okay.
Then, just 6 days later, boom, the Union Cabinet approves the bill. But some opposition MPs said they weren't happy because their objections to the bill were taken out of the final report.
Without their consent?
Yeah, that's what they said. So some people are saying the whole process wasn't very transparent.
I can see why they'd be upset about that. So let's break down what this new act actually says. What are the big changes compared to the old one?
Okay, so one of the biggest changes is about this thing called the Waqf by user doctrine. In the old law, if a property had been used by the community for a long time, like if it was a mosque or a graveyard, they could call it Waqf property, even if they didn't have the papers to prove it.
So even without official documentation?
Right. But the new act says, okay, if it was already registered as Waqf based on usage before this new law, then fine, it stays Waqf. But going forward, you need proof. You can't just say, oh, we've been using this for ages, so it's ours.
So they're trying to make it more clear-cut.
Exactly. No more fuzzy claims.
What else is different?
Okay, so now, if you want to create a walk-in, you have to have practiced Islam for at least 5 years.
5 years.
Yeah, that's the new rule.
Yeah.
They're trying to stop people from just transferring property to Waqf overnight, maybe for shady reasons. Like, imagine someone converts and then suddenly donates a bunch of property to Waqf. It just raises suspicion.
I guess that makes sense. They're trying to prevent abuse of the system.
Exactly.
Okay, so what about the Waqf boards themselves? I heard they're changing who can be on them.
Yeah, this is a big one. They're now requiring at least 2 non-Muslim members on every board, both the Central Waqf Council and all the state boards.
Interesting. So not just Muslims anymore.
Right, and the CEO of the board doesn't have to be Muslim either. The government's saying it's about transparency and fairness.
Okay, but if they're managing religious endowments, are non-Muslims going to be making decisions about religious matters?
Well, the government says they won't. They'll be there for administrative and financial stuff, to make sure things are running properly. But yeah, it's a big change for sure.
It is. And what about the Waqf tribunals? Those were the ones deciding disputes under the old act, right?
Right. And they're getting a makeover, too. They used to have 2 members. Now they'll have 3. A district judge, a senior government official, and an expert in Muslim law.
So a more diverse panel.
Exactly. More expertise in different areas.
It sounds like the government's really trying to get more involved in this whole Waqf property thing.
They definitely are. Now, only senior officers, like someone higher than a district collector, can do those property surveys to decide if something's Waqf.
So more oversight from the government.
Yeah, you could say that. And their final report is what matters. If they say it's government land, then the revenue records are changed. The Waqf board has to update their records, and that's that.
So it takes the decision out of the Waqf board's hands in those cases.
Exactly. They're trying to streamline things, make it more standardized.
Makes sense. What about all those unregistered properties? Are they doing anything about that?
Oh, yeah. Transparency is the name of the game now. They're making a centralized online portal, and every single Waqf property in the country has to be registered there within 6 months.
6 months. That's a tight deadline.
It is, but the Waqf Tribunal can give extensions if there's a good reason.
Okay, so some flexibility there.
Yep.
You mentioned earlier that there was some change about the Limitation Act. What was that all about?
Okay, this one's a bit complicated, but it's really important. So the old law had this exemption for Waqf properties. It basically meant there was no time limit for the Waqf board to take back a property if someone was occupying it illegally. They could wait years, decades even. Yeah. But the new act throws that out the window. Now, the Limitation Act applies to Waqf property just like any other property.
Right.
So if someone's been living on Waqf land illegally for 12 years or more and nobody challenged them, guess what?
What?
They could actually end up owning that land legally.
Whoa, that's a huge shift.
It is. And some people are furious about it. Like Asadun Nawazi, he's been very vocal against it. He says it's going to lead to Muslims losing their land.
So a lot of controversy around this new law, as we expected.
Oh, yeah.
What about appeals? Can people still challenge decisions in court?
Yeah, they've made that easier, actually. If you disagree with a Waqf tribunal's decision, you can go to the high court now. But there's a 90-day time limit, and the property usually has to be registered on that online portal.
So they're trying to make the process more efficient.
Right.
But with all these changes, it's no surprise that people are pushing back. Who's been most vocal against the new act?
Well, the All India Muslim Personal Law Board is definitely not happy. They're saying any change to the Waqf Act is a direct attack on their rights to manage their religious affairs. And a political party, the Janata Dal United, they're worried about the retrospective aspect of the law. They say it could create even more confusion and legal problems.
Yeah, it's definitely a sensitive issue. So as we wrap up, it's clear that the Waqf Board and this new act are incredibly complicated, right?
Yeah, no doubt about it.
What are your final thoughts? What should we be taking away from all this?
I think the big thing is we've got to be able to separate emotion from logic. I get it. People are concerned, especially in the Muslim community. They feel like their rights are being threatened. But we also have to look at the facts on the ground.
What do you mean?
Well, the Waqf Board is this massive landowner. But has it really helped the average Muslim in India? Look at the poverty, the lack of education, the lack of opportunities in the community. Has all this land ownership actually translated into real benefits?
That's a great question.
It is. And it raises even more questions. Should we be thinking about using those empty Waqf properties to generate income? Maybe create a special fund for education, healthcare, things like that, specifically for Muslims who need it most.
That's an interesting idea.
Yeah, and are we just focusing on holding on to land instead of actually using it to make a difference? And then there's the whole history of how some of this Waqf land came to be. Some of it was granted by Mughal rulers, not necessarily donated out of people's own pockets. Should we be reevaluating that too?
Those are all great points. A lot to think about.
Definitely.
So this new Waqf Act, Umeed, it's the law of the land now. What should our listeners be doing?
I think it's on all of us to really understand what this act says, why they made these changes. We need to be informed to prevent abuse. And we need to make sure this law, whether we agree with it or not, actually serves the people it's supposed to help.
That's right. We can't just sit back and let things happen. We have to be engaged, be informed, make our voices heard. So, as always, keep the conversation going in the comments. Tell us what you think. Share your insights. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Thanks for having me.